So there is a better alternative. It's what we call agile software development. And the insight for agile is that, look, even if we basically know what it is that we want to build, it doesn't make sense to start building, close our eyes, and then fast forward 18 months, 2 years, 4 years, open our eyes and say, hey, how do we do? Because it could be that what we actually get at the end is radically different from what we specified, regardless of whether the thing we specified was actually a good idea or not. Instead, let's actually do incremental development where we iteratively change the economics of our development methodology to emphasize flexibility and the ability to change direction rapidly. So as we gain more information about what it is that we want to build, we can increase the probability that we'll actually build something useful at the end. And so this is a situation where the problem is relatively well known and the solution is what's unknown. So like the canonical agile software development project is as follows. You have a big company that needs a new payroll system. And the old payroll system runs on mainframes and it's clunky and nobody knows how to use it anymore. And the new one's going to run on modern commodity hardware. So that's a project that under waterfall can fail outright. But when we use agile software development, this is actually extreme programming, the diagram I have up here. This is the project it was invented for. It doesn't actually make sense to ask, what problem are we trying to solve? That's actually completely blatantly obvious. Every company already has a payroll system. And the new payroll system is supposed to do what? Exactly what the old payroll system does feature for feature. And so by bringing a kind of shortening the feedback loop between deliveries, we basically do things like in extreme programming, we would take an in-house customer, like say someone from the accounting department who actually runs payroll, and we would sit them physically next to the engineers building payroll. So that if one of the engineers is trying to figure out, hey, what am I supposed to do on this screen? Does this make sense? What's deferred amortization? Or like, what the hell is payroll anyway? Instead of having to make a request to their manager who puts it in a pneumatic tube and it goes up to some other part of the org chart and then goes down, somebody's manager finds a customer to get the answer. So he just turns his chair to the left, says, excuse me, customer, should it be like this or like that? And they get an authoritative answer very quickly. And so the insight for Agile is that we can change the unit of progress to, instead of advancing the methodology, unit of progress is a line of working code. That means any activity that we do as a development organization that doesn't contribute to actually making working code is a waste of time. That includes documentation that nobody reads, tests that never get run, in fact, meetings of almost every kind, documents that don't directly contribute to a line of code, and actually a lot of code itself, which is actually designed to anticipate problems that we might have someday in the future. If we never have those problems, then that code was a complete waste. As well, it's important that the code actually works. So code with bugs just creates deferred maintenance opportunities. So that's a very effective way to build software. If you're in a large organization and you're trying to solve this kind of problem, it works really well. The only problem is that startups face the unknown problem. So think about that idea of having an authoritative in-house customer who sits with your engineers. Now think about combining that with what Steve was talking about, where all you have is a vision, or maybe a delusion, about who the customer is going to be. Who are you going to sit with the engineers? So one of the problems you run into is there's nobody on earth who can give you an authoritative answer for what is it that we're trying to build. Yet all of our processes for startups are based in this idea that we have these kind of clear departments, engineering, QA, sales and marketing, business development, that all have their kind of functions to execute kind of, I get the plan from marketing and then I build it, I hand it to QA. So in order for us to actually build an organization that can do both customer development and agile development together, we have to abolish those departmental boundaries. So instead of having what we used to call sales and marketing, business development, God forbid a business analyst or something like that, we have a problem team that is executing the iterative process of customer development, trying to come up with a hypothesis for what is it that we're trying to do here, who is it for, and simultaneously what we used to call engineering, QA, operations, we now call the solution team. Again, iteratively trying to come up with experiments that demonstrate what it is, that what we're currently think is going to work actually is going to work. And the really big idea here is that it changes what the unit of progress is for a startup. When I work in my consulting practice as an advisor with startup founders, I notice this pattern. They're always, always selling. all the time convincing their employees that the vision is good, convincing their investors that they're making progress, convincing potential customers that they should sign on, partners, journalists, PR. I mean, they are busy making sure that everybody's kind of on board and giving 120%. And yet, what I have noticed is that when they're alone, when they kind of go home at night, and they actually think about, all right, what did I accomplish today? I know for sure that I kept everybody busy. Okay, so we definitely expended a lot of energy. But did we make any progress? How do you measure that progress? Think about the previous definitions we used. Advancing the plan, could that be progress? But I think that's pretty well debunked, I hope, in this audience. I used to, as a technical co-founder, I used to be like, look, if I wrote working code, that constitutes progress. And I'll tell you one story just from InView about a line of working code. We had a brilliant strategy at InView that helped us raise money and worked really well. And the idea was we're building a new instant messaging product. And everybody knows instant messaging is a network effects business, right? So the value of the network increases with the square of the number of participants. I see at least a few people nodding. That's Metcalfe's law. Therefore, there's high switching costs, because if you want to switch to a new network, you have to bring all your friends with you at the same time. And that creates a durable barrier to entry for bringing a new instant messaging network to market, right? Everyone with me so far? When I do this with MBAs, they're especially like, oh, yeah, that's a really clever strategy. Good analysis, right? And so our idea, we had a kind of strategic brilliance. We will create an instant messaging add-on product that interoperates with all of the instant messaging networks and clients and allows you to bring, we were building 3D avatar stuff, that 3D avatar technology into the instant messaging network. And that way people won't need a new buddy list. They won't have to learn a new program. Everything will kind of work in an interoperable way. The only problem with that strategy is that whiteboard exercise I just talked about, all the network effects and the barriers to entry, everything I just said is wrong. It's actually not true. There are not network effects in the instant messaging business. It does not create a barrier to entry. There are not very high switching costs, at least for the customers that we were talking to. So I don't want to get into kind of, well, is that true? What's the business analysis part of it? I'd like you just for a second to empathize with me. I'm the technical co-founder. I actually physically wrote all the tens of thousands of lines of code to do IM interoperability with every freaking IM client under the sun, which was not the easiest or most fun project I've ever worked on in my life, I'm willing to admit. And I had kind of said, well, hold on, I did everything right. We released early, we released often. I used unit tests. We had just the right kind of documentation, not too much, not too little. The code was well factored. We had the good architecture. Kind of from an extreme programming point of view, we had done it to the letter with the pair programming and the collective code ownership. And I could enumerate all the processes. We've kind of done everything right. And yet you're telling me, despite the fact that we drove all that waste out of our development methodology after we had built all those lines of working code, we still had to throw them all away? And the answer was yes. We had to throw every single one of those lines of perfectly good working code away, because the biggest source of waste in a startup is building something that nobody wants, which unfortunately most startups fail because that's all they ever build. At least with InView, we had the power of the customer development methodology to help us realize we'd made that mistake and throw the code away before it was too late. So we have that in our defense. But it certainly led me to think, wait a minute, that's not good enough. As the head of engineering, my goal is to not have any waste at all in my process. And so it requires us to integrate into a company-wide feedback loop what we're learning as we iteratively build the product with what we're learning as we iteratively investigate the business model and customers. And so I think the right unit of progress for a startup is what we would call validated learning about customers. You saw that customer validation circle? And I put dollar signs on there because, as Steve had said, revenue is, of course, the best indicator. The idea here is that progress is not your code. Progress is not your plans. Progress is not even the money you make as revenues or as investment or anything else. It is the learning inside the heads of the people that work in your company. It is a 100% intangible and highly perishable good. But any activity you do that promotes that learning is progress, and anything that doesn't promote that progress directly is a form of waste and should be eliminated. That's what engineering looks like in the context of what we call the lean startup. That is the combination of customer development and agile development integrated into a company-wide feedback loop. And because this is a bit of an eye chart, I have a simplified diagram that is actually a lot simpler and easier to read. This is the Fisher-Price version of my first startup. What is it that startups do? We start with ideas about what we think our product should be, what customers are going to want, what Steve calls hypotheses, what we can all call guesses here. And then most software startups anyway, I wrote this for software, but it works for any product. Software startup is effectively a gigantic catalyst that turns ideas into code. Everything else is a side effect. Now, if we're really an advanced company, we can do something like measure what happens when customers interact with that code. And if we're really advanced, we could try to learn something. That is, we could use that data to influence our next set of ideas. So that's the full fundamental feedback loop of what it is that startups do. OK, that's, like I said, the Fisher-Price version, very simple. The idea of the lean startup and all of the practices and tactics that we have talked about, and we can talk a little bit more about if there's time, is to try everything we can to reduce the total time through this loop. Any practice which optimizes one leg of the journey at the expense of another is a bad idea. So for example, what I call the engineer's fallacy. Well, why do we have all this metrics code cluttering up my code? Right? It makes it slower to iterate the product. We have to store these giant data warehouses. We build all these reports that nobody reads. Wouldn't it be faster and easier if we just stopped measuring things? And the problem with that fallacy is that that's a 100% true argument. It would be faster to implement if we just didn't bother measuring anything. But then we're not actually going to be able to learn anything. There's my favorite, the data warehousing fallacy. Do we have any data warehousing, like analysts in the room, data warehouse people? Anybody? OK, it's a safe audience. I apologize just to the one in the back. Data warehousing fallacy is if measuring a few things is good, measuring more things is better. Repeat ad infinitum. So if we can have 10 graphs, why not have 10,000 graphs to measure out everything we can possibly think of? And the only problem with that idea is that nobody can learn anything from 10,000 graphs. And my all-time favorite, the MBA's fallacy. The absolute fastest way to iterate your business plan is to do it at the whiteboard. Wake up in the morning, come in, spend all day moving arrows and boxes around on the whiteboard, go to sleep, let your unconscious work on it a little more, wake up in the shower, you have some more good ideas, come in the morning, and change the whiteboard. And just keep going, right? Just new idea, put it on the whiteboard, iterate, new idea, put it on the whiteboard. That is actually the fastest kind of iteration about a company business plan you can find. And the only problem is, if you're not actually doing anything, there's no facts involved in the process. And it's actually a complete waste of time. So there's not time to go into every single tactic that actually could work to minimize this time. But I think it would be good if we got a chance to talk about a few. How are we doing on time?
Wrap up soon would be great.
Excellent.
All right. So this is why Eric was my best student. He actually was able to coherently translate what customer development meant on a technical level and go implement it. So a couple of first steps. I think what you're hearing from us consistently is a fact-based culture. Startups are inherently, if they're passion and vision-driven, a faith-based culture. And having that distinction in everything you plan and everything you say in meetings is really important. Are we having a faith-based discussion, or are we having a fact-based discussion? I'm happy to invest or sometimes even act on faith. But gee, hiring tens if not hundreds of people and raising tens of millions of dollars on faith is a little too much. Build a fact-based culture. 2 is decide on a business model early, not often and early. And understand what are your fundamental drivers of growth. Please don't give me, oh, it's a freemium revenue user whatever model just so you cover all of them. It doesn't work. I think what you heard from Eric is to create a decision loop, build, measure, learn. Write your hypotheses down. When I teach at Stanford, I love to get them into drawing again. And I just think there are 3 diagrams. If you don't love business plans, if you draw these 3, you could write a business plan from it. And that is, draw me your business model. Draw me your distribution channel model. And draw me your demand creation model. And give me the little flows, ins and outs. And once you start doing that, you'll realize how much you know or how much you don't know. But that would help you just make your hypotheses concrete. Prove it in the micro scale before you start hiring and staffing and scaling. For execution, I don't have to tell entrepreneurs that it's relentless. Just relentless. 24/7. I didn't know how to do it any other way, and I expect neither do you. This is not a 9-to-5 business. But it's not relentless without thinking. One of the best examples, or at least the best speeches I ever heard about this, if any of you have ever seen the movie Patton. General Patton's standing in front of this huge American flag, and the best part of that speech is when he says, you know, most American soldiers think the best thing you could do is die for your country. And he says, that's the worst thing you could do. The best thing you could do is make the other damn guy die for his country. Well, the same thing is true for a startup. I don't care that you're working 28 hours a day. I want to know that you're working smart 28 hours a day, and most of it shouldn't be spent physically or virtually in the building. Your team needs to be true believers, not employees. Again, I think all of you who are passionate entrepreneurs know that. Focus on the few things that matter. Don't confuse your hypotheses with fact. And this customer contact stuff, I get a lot of people say, Steve, I read your book, and I actually went out and talked to a customer. And then, so I did. And well, okay, then what did you do? If you have a web-based product and you don't have thousands of data points, why don't you just give my book to someone else? And if you're in even an enterprise product and you haven't talked to tens of companies, this is not a single point of data. This is getting a continuous stream of feedback. When do you stop? When you stop is when all the data is starting to look the same. Right? When you at least say, I understand this, and there's no further refinement that would be useful. And here's the other one is, for those of you who've done startups before, this makes sense. For those of you who are new to the game, every new entrepreneur drives by looking in the rearview mirror. Oh, our competitor X is going to put us out of business. You know, to be honest, I always used to love to take over companies that were fifth in a group of three. Why? Because it's never about how crowded the space is. The winners are always the ones that execute relentlessly and just kick the butts out of your competitors. The only people that could put a startup out of business in the first 2 to 3 years is you. It's not a competitor, and Google isn't going to come into your new market and whatever. And the odds of that are pretty low. It's your lack of execution. General principles, and we'll wrap up. If you think entrepreneurship is about the money, become a VC. And my apologies to the VCs, but it's not the same business. And chasing a startup for the cash is a Zen-like thing. The more you chase the money, the further it will move. You gotta love the business. You gotta be in it for the chase and the passion. If you're trying to engineer a flip, some people are great at that. To me, that's not entrepreneurship. Just another one, an encouragement to the rest of you. If everybody thinks it's a bad idea, that might be a very good sign.
It's a barrier to entry.
And the converse is, the better your reality distortion field for you and your employees, the more important it is that you get outside the building, because you will tend to believe your own press releases. And that's incredibly dangerous. And that is, in fact, an observation from someone who had an awesome reality distortion field. This one I just now kind of mentioned all the time because it's in the news, but in your careers, every one of you will encounter an ethical situation that requires some choices. You know, we see it today with Madoff, and we saw it in Enron, and it happens in Silicon Valley all the time. Let me just remind you that all those companies had plaques about ethics and values, every one of them. Ethics and values are not what you put in plaques or tell your employees or whatever. It's when you practice when the stuff hits the fan. You know, when you have to tell your VCs the bad news, or you could lie about it, or when you have to lay off employees but you could kind of fudge something or whatever. Life's too short, guys, and you will all run into this. And maybe you'll get away with it the first time or whatever, but I don't think there's an organization, and from baseball to, you know, professional cycling to Wall Street, that in the long run wins. So keep that in mind as you run your business. This is just, entrepreneurship is the world's best thing to be in. I mean, it allows you to, like, I couldn't believe I actually got paid to go to work for 20 plus years in Silicon Valley. It was the most exciting thing I ever did. And at the end, if you're good and lucky and maybe lucky and good, I don't know, but in some order, the payoff will come. But enjoy what you do. So thank you very much. Further reading, the course text is, you can get it on Cafe Press. Eric and I both have a blog. I decided to take those 30 years of war stories and put them on the web, and I think maybe my kids are reading them. And Eric has a lessons learned blog. I think you're having let's see, where did I go, Eric? One more? Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
Start there.
You're having a webcast tomorrow, and you're doing a Lean Startup workshop at the end of the month. So thank you very much for your time, and let's go have dinner.
Yeah.